Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to I Thought You'd Like to Know. This is Dr. Ronda Chervin, Emerita Professor at Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and also one of the founders of WCAT Radio. And what I thought you'd like to know is about a marvelous new book that's just been published called Healing. And it's by Matt DeAntuono, and I'm going to ask him to tell you just a little bit about who he is. And later we'll tell you about other books he's written as well. But this is the book I just read that I love, that I hope to get into your hands. So go, Matthew.
Hello. Thank you. I really appreciate your words about the book. So you asked me to introduce myself. I'm a high school physics teacher by trade, grew up in New Jersey and got a degree in physics, and in that time had a conversion experience in a Protestant setting. And then for a little while, trying to disprove Catholicism, I happened to meet Peter Kraft and got to know him, and then converted to Catholicism. My wife was not happy about that. She's the daughter of a Protestant minister who thankfully is open-minded, and he understands enough to know that we weren't leaving Jesus. And since my wife and I, so we're both Catholic now. She has since joined the church, and I had the wonderful opportunity to tell my story on the journey home with Marcus Grodi a couple of years ago. We have 8 children, and we just had 6 weeks ago our 8th child. And that brings the numbers to an even 4 and 4. 4 boys, 4 girls. We also have 4 adopted and 4 biological. And we have a YouTube channel. It's where we do weekly gospel. We do the weekly gospel reading, and then a little reflection on it. And that channel is Mr. D 418, and Mr. is spelled out. It's like MISTERD 418, no spaces or anything.
Well, please repeat that after the program, because until they hear what you can do, they're not going to be interested in writing that down.
Good point.
So please repeat that. So let me tell you just a little bit about the book, the framework of the book, and then I'll have Matthew, the author, read some salient passages from the book that will give you a taste of it. So here's how I want to introduce the book. It's a book which is a genre which I've read a few other things in that genre, but not too many, which is a writer trying in a fictional form to show you what it would be like if Jesus was walking on the earth today and what he might be like in contemporary dress and backdrop of 21st century instead of the first century, and so forth, with the view to showing you how loving in a very concrete way Jesus is, and how he wants to heal us of the type of wounds that we have, which keep us from either experiencing all of his love and especially not being more loving to others, because we have this denial mechanism where we don't even realize what we're doing that's unloving and that's closing us off from the wonderful experience of God's tender, merciful love as shown through Jesus when he was walking on earth, and now through his other means of reaching out to us. So with this in mind, could you, Matthew, could you just describe the basic plot outline?
So the book opens up, and one of the other key things with this book is that I tried to make kind of the interior life visible. And so it's all about health. So the book is The Healing, and the name of the Christ character is Sal, which comes from the Latin word that means to heal or health. And so what we experience as our moral failings is seen in the book in terms of health. And so the character opens up and he's injured, and he knows that he's injured, and he can actually see his heart, and he can see this hole in his heart. he thinks it's because of the argument he had with his girlfriend. And then this character shows up, Sal, and he kind of recognizes him, and Sal offers to heal him. And he hesitantly accepts. And then Sal leads him kind of on a journey throughout the city. They're in this city. And Sal is teaching him and showing him different things. And then the main character, is realizing things about himself. His eyes are being opened up, and he's realizing that he's in poorer health than he realized. Sal leads him around, and he shows him some of the different diseases, not to despise people, but to look at them and see exactly what they're doing to themselves, the different activities and the different forms of illness. And illness really is vice, and strength and health really is virtue. And so
yes,
then after going...
that's such an imaginative way to use that analogy throughout. So all these people feel as if they've been physically hurt, but really that hurt is just an analogy or a metaphor for the actual spiritual hurt that they're in because of their own sins and wounds, or wounds and sins. So give us an example. Could you read out an example?
Yeah, let me give an example. Okay, let me go here. So he ends up in a cafe. Sal leads him into a cafe, and there's a man who comes in, and he meets a man who had been a friend of his father, and then let me just make sure I can find it. Oh, yeah. And so he is having a conversation with this man, and he's talking to this man about his father, and the father says, the friend of the father says, "I remember your father, and you look just like him." So he's getting angry, and then the main character says, "I heard some clanging as the chains around his chest began to tighten further." So he sees this man, he's got these chains around his chest. The man doesn't know this. He's unaware, just like vice blinds us to ourselves and our own disease or our own vice. And then the man says, "And I never forgiven your father for what he did to me." And then he says, "I did not want to be the cause of any more pain for this man." And then he says, I know that you and my father never resumed your friendship, but he was sorry for what he did. In fact, I think he wrote you a letter asking for your forgiveness." This is what the main character says to the man. The man says to him, "I remember the letter, but I cannot forgive him for what he did." And then the chains grew tighter still, and his breathing became labored. Blood began to gather around some of the places where the chains dug in the most. And then he says to the man, "But why? Can't you see you're hurting yourself?" The man replies, "I'm hurting your father by refusing his apology. I want him to feel bad, and this is my way of getting revenge." And the main character says back to the father's friend, "But the chains are on your chest. Can't you see that you're hurting only yourself? My father is dead now and gave up any ill will towards you a long time ago." And the narration, "The metal links of the chain clanged as they reached a new level of strain. The man rocked back in his chair, stood up, pushed me to the ground, and walked out of the cafe." So the idea there is that whenever we hold a grudge, we only hurt ourselves. I've heard people say that. And I was trying to illustrate that, really to give an analogy for what it is that we do to ourselves. We don't hurt someone else. Instead, we just enslave ourselves. It's like we wrap ourselves in chains, and those chains get tighter and tighter the more that we hang on to that grudge and we nurse it. So that's just one example.
Can I ask you this, Matt? I love that section, by the way. But can I ask you this? How did you get on to this whole way of thinking about healing and forgiveness and all this kind of thing? Were you always very forgiving and gentle and all that yourself?
Absolutely. I've been forgiving and gentle my whole life. Let me tell you, I've just been no, absolutely not. I wish. Wow. Oh my goodness. Let me tell you. Yeah, no, part of what came from this is looking inside myself, of course, and seeing the disease that I have. But what it was, as I started to learn about philosophy, and now I'm so blessed to be working on a philosophy degree with Holy Apostles in a Catholic Thomist setting. It's wonderful. I did get a bachelor's degree in philosophy after my physics degree because I was so interested in it. And thankfully, I had people who had turned me on to the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas and really also, in a way, Plato and Aristotle. And I learned, good ethics, that is virtue ethics, natural law ethics. And I started immediately thinking about virtue and vice in this way, that really virtue is just that it's the health of soul, and vice is a disease of soul. And what if we could see that? And I remember reading, it's actually from Thomas Merton in his book, Seven Storey Mountain. He relates a story about his father talking to somebody and saying that Augustine had this idea that when we take revenge on somebody else, the sword passes first through us and then the other person. And so, I mean, that I was trying to capture something like that in this passage with the chains, but it didn't quite work, so I came up with the chains instead. But that had been a helpful way for me of thinking about virtue and vice as I was learning about this beautiful way of looking at ethics. Typically we tend to be either utilitarian or kind of like deontologists, like Kant, like there's a moral law that you follow no matter what, instead of seeing ethics as the pursuit of true fullness and thriving of the self that the ancients had seen and the people in the Middle Ages had really developed to its fullness.
Mm. I challenge people, as I'm a retired professor, and when I teach ethics and philosophy of love, I challenge people and I say, think about the most loving person you've ever met and think about how even they are, how consistent, and how you love to be with them because you know they're going to be loving in any situation that arises versus having this tension thinking at any moment this person's going to lash out if they're frustrated and all that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's the overflow of that strength of character and who they are, because love is the perfection of all the virtues.
Yes, but we can't love in that beautiful way unless we experience the love of Jesus in our hearts.
Right.
And that wasn't a thing that was emphasized, particularly when I'm a convert to the Catholic faith. And when I came into the Catholic faith in 1959, that wasn't a thing that was emphasized, experiencing God's love in your heart. It was much more centered on the response of worship to the glory of God and thanksgiving, but not this sense in the book. You managed to convey from the way you describe the Jesus figure how his love pierces through this resistance to virtue, which comes from clinging on to the negative emotions. So do you have a passage that you could read to show them this?
Well, if I have one in mind that comes immediately to mind about that. But he does, the character does resist in some ways. He keeps trying to pass off. Maybe I can think of one. Let's see. So he goes, at one point he decides, you know what, I'm not going to follow him anymore. And kind of another key thing that I wrote into the book is that as Sal is leading him throughout the city, if you follow the turns that they make, they go in the shape of a cross, and at the center of the cross is where some kind of key action happens. But at one point he decides I'm not going to follow him anymore, and so he's angry and he leaves. And Sal says to him, "You're becoming sick again." And he's walking away. And at this point in the path in the city, he's actually leaving the path of the cross. And Sal says to him, because the main character is angry as he's thinking about an event that he just saw. And Sal says, "You're getting sick." And he says, "Yeah, I'm getting sick thinking about what happened. I can't imagine being so petty." And Sal says to him, No, your blindness is increasing. You're getting sick again. You have to stop. And he could tell that Sal's concerned And then he says, wait, stop what? What am I doing? Like, he doesn't even understand, again, the blindness of vice and sin in us. And Sal says to him, you're judging him. And then he says, well, I'm better than him, aren't I? And Sal says, no, that's not it. And then he says, come with me, I have something to show you. So Sal brings him into a restaurant, and they go into the bathroom, and he tells him to look in the mirror. And he looks at his eyes, and he sees that his eyes are almost completely clouded over. And his eyes had been getting clearer as time had been going on. And then Sal talks to him, and he says, if you can see the illness in other people, it's only to remind you of how ill you yourself are. And the whole time, I tried to make it so that Sal was not angry at him, but just expressing concern. And, of course, to someone who's sick, someone like the main character in the book, it can seem strange, and it can seem like anger at times, but it is always from a place of love and concern for us that he tries to heal us.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things to realize, is that Jesus is sad when we sin in one way or another. He's sad for us as well as for our victims, and he's sad for us because he knows we won't be able to be happy if we cling to these negative emotions all the time. We can't be happy.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and the thing is, the less happy we are, the less we know it. So all the things that the main character is learning in the city, like he's talking to the guy with the chains, and he says, "Don't you see what you're doing to yourself?" But it's no use. I'm trying to illustrate.
We see what other people.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was trying to illustrate what I sometimes have come out in conversations with my students, is that they don't even think twice about taking revenge or trying to get back. And especially now with digital media, it's so easy and it costs so little to retaliate in some way. And it's just part of the culture. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. And that's the doctors in the city. Those are like a lot of our kind of pop psychologists that just kind of cover with these little bandages instead of really getting to the root of the issue, which ultimately only Jesus can do. Get down to the heart.
Why don't you read us another passage? Read us another passage that you particularly like.
Sure. One that I liked was, and again, kind of along these lines, was, where is that? Oh, I see. Okay. See if I can find that passage here. So at one point, they're in a park, and Sal, the main character, they see a small crowd of people gathering and listening. And so, of course, if I'm dealing with this allegory, there's got to be a way to talk about God. And so God, in the allegory, in the context of this kind of ongoing analogy in the book, God is the great physician. He is kind of the great healer. And so, of course, an atheist is someone who objects to the theory of the great physician. And so there's a man there who's talking about this. He's an atheist, and he's objecting. If the great physician is so great, why is there so much illness in the world? People are ridden with disease. Why aren't these people just healed, kind of miraculously? And the main character is looking at him, and he says, well, that man looks impressive. His head is very large, and his brain was very healthy. So again, in this world, he can see people's insides. They can see each other's health to some degree. And then he looked over to Sal for an explanation, because Sal seems to be pretty sure that this great physician exists, but this man is very intelligent. I mean, look at his brain. And Sal says to him, are you impressed with the size of his head, or are you impressed with his argument? And the main character says, well, the first thing I notice is his head. Surely that lends credence to his argument. And then Sal walks over and stands next to the man, and he sees that the man's head is actually not abnormally large or healthy, because Sal's is just as big, but the core of the man's body was shriveled and small, as if from misuse or lack of use of his chest his chest was withered and atrophied. His head only seemed large because of the disproportion between the rest of his body and his head. This, for me, was an image of what C.S. Lewis calls men without chests in his book, The Abolition of Man. And he's talking about people who have become so kind of overly intellectual, like, I guess, rationalists in the negative sense of the rationalists, who and this man, from, again, lack of exercise, just like the main character, his arms are shriveled because he's never done anything really to help other people. The same kind of thing here. So there's someone who doesn't believe in the great physician, not because he's so intelligent, but because his whole self is not attuned to what real health is. And, oftentimes I find that people who object to the existence of God have a poor understanding of what real goodness is like.
Very, very good. It's almost impossible, and this is how I'm going to urge you on to get this book, and you can tell us in a minute how they can get this book. It's almost impossible from just the little excerpts that Matt is reading to you to get a sense of how powerful this book is in this way, that because it's a novel and because it's written in such an interesting way, people who are allergic to the type of arguments you might want to give them about the problem of pain and God's love and all this, their minds can be opened and their hearts opened as they're reading this. They can't help thinking, what is he writing about that's like me, see? And they can't help being charmed by the figure of Jesus, who is so different from the way they think of him, perhaps, and that would block them. So I really urge you to get this book both for yourself because it's so delightfully written, even if you believe all this and don't have many of these problems, but especially to give to people who are kind of confused, who think of morality as just the rules and think of, maybe there's a God, but maybe not, and meanwhile life is miserable. This book could help them enormously, I think. So, Matthew, tell them, how would they get the book? Do they just click healing and your name and Amazon and they'll get it?
Yeah, that's it. The healing.
Yes, but of course they're not going to remember your name. So could you spell it could you pronounce it and spell it very, very slowly? And meanwhile, those of you who are listening, take out your pencil and paper or take out, click this name onto your phone.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Matthew, and the last name is D'Antuono. It's D''A''N''T''U''O''N'. I'll spell it again. D''A''N''T''U''O''N'. And, of course, the book is The Healing, and it's available on Amazon either as an ebook or a paperback.
Very, very nice. Now, you've also written some other books, so tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, those have been much more kind of straightforward. So this one is allegory, and this one I wrote before the others, but it's gone through some revisions, and I've asked some people for some help. And then, but the other ones are pretty straightforward philosophy. The most recent one of those other three are what I call Philosophy Fridays, what my students call Philosophy Fridays. So my students found out, I teach physics, but my students found out that I have a degree in physics and philosophy, and that I study philosophy, and they want to know about it, of course. So we started this thing called Philosophy Fridays. Just every Friday we start off with a short philosophical quote, dilemma, something, or I give them an argument and we find the logical fallacy. And the students love it. They love it, and they've always given me great feedback. So a couple of years ago, I just recorded, in several different classes, I recorded my Philosophy Friday sessions, and then I kind of put them together and just typed out, kind of almost made a transcript of these sessions that I have with my students. And that one's called Philosophy Fridays.
Oh, okay. Now, is that published by En route Books?
That one's published by En route, yeah. These three...
Yeah, so En route Books. Now, the trouble with the title En route Books is En route, the way we pronounce it, is the French pronunciation En route, but it's E-N and capital R-O-U-T-E, and that's the publisher that is connected to WCAT Radio. So when you look at WCAT Radio that you're listening to, and if you go to the home page, you'll see En route Books, and you can find this book.
Yep. And so that was that one, Philosophy Fridays.
Mm-hmm.
There's another book, and so that one is that because I teach in a secular school, I teach in a public school, so there's nothing explicitly religious in that one. So that one is, I think, really helpful if someone's looking for a book they want to give to someone who is not a believer and they might be turned off by any talk, but they want to kind of stimulate some philosophical thought in that person's mind.
Okay, so give them, many people don't even know, who are listening, don't even know what philosophy is. So give an example of a question in that book that you have the people dialoguing about and you giving the true answer to.
Sure.
So what would be an issue?
Okay. One of the first questions I ask my students in the year is I say to them, have you ever seen the number 2? And of course they look at me like I'm an idiot, like wait, or like I've lost my mind. Like what is he asking? Why is he asking if we've ever seen the number 2? And I kind of play along. So they, I'm like, no, seriously, have you ever seen the number 2? And so they nod sheepishly, and I say, well, where? And they point, like to a clock or someplace. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's the number 2. And I point, I say, that's the number 2, right? And like, yeah, of course. And I write 2 on the board, and I say, is this the number 2? And they say, yeah, of course. And then I stop, and I say to them very slowly, I said, I have news for you. This is not the number 2. And then they really think I've lost my mind. But then I tell them, this is a symbol that represents the number 2. And then, they don't even know where to go. Some of the kids will even make noises like, whoa, or something like that. You can tell that they've just blown their minds. And so what I try to do is to get them thinking about the nature of things. That's really the ultimate goal in philosophy. What is the true nature of things? And things that we talk about all the time. We interact with human beings, but what is really the nature of the human being? How does a human being exist? And thinking about numbers, well then if that's not the number 2, then have we ever seen the number 2? And what is the nature of numbers and how do they exist? And what is the source of being? And the different ways that plays out as well. So it's the nature of the human being. So then if we understand the nature of the human being, what is the right way to act for a human being? And that's what ethics is. Right? What is real happiness and fullness of being for one of these things that we call a human being? Getting to how is it that we know things?
Oh yes. Now the point is, many of your friends who are atheists or think they're atheists, they think everything is just matter. We're all just bunches of cells, atoms
right.
and so forth, joined together through evolution or something like that. So when I was transitioning from atheism to the Catholic Church, I had this boyfriend who was an ex-Catholic atheist. So to try to move him along, I would say sarcastically, oh, so when you say you love me, you mean you just love this piece of meat? Is that what you mean?
Right, yeah.
So if I have no soul, I'm just a piece of meat, right? And then he's...
Yeah.
So besides cleverness, the point of some of these philosophical points is that it takes away the barrier in the mind of the person to seeing the truth, because once they see that there's such a thing as things that aren't material like soul, then they can get a little closer to the idea maybe there could be an invisible God who isn't matter, who created everything and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's part of my motivation in asking the question about the number 2, because the number 2 is not material. And if someone's a materialist, then when they talk about the number 2, they're really talking about nonsense. They're talking about nothing. But of course, I don't go into that with my students, especially not at that point. They're just just starting to try to think about that. And in my mind, it was my study of philosophy that helped me in my path to embrace Catholicism, the beauty and the fullness of the thought that I found there. And that leads to another book I called it A Fool's Errand. And the title comes from this idea that only people who are wise realize how foolish they are. That's part of the book here, The Healing, right? The blindness of vice. So even foolishness blinds us to our own foolishness. But someone who's wise knows that they're a fool, and they can then pursue wisdom. So a philosopher is someone who loves wisdom, and only someone who knows that he's a fool can go on the errand of pursuing wisdom. So I call it A Fool's Errand. And it's really an introduction to Catholics for philosophy. And I made it brief. I wanted it to be not intimidating, something that I really wrote for high school age students and maybe even middle school if they're inclined in that way. But anyone can read it, and it's brief. It's not a textbook, because I just wanted to give people a little taste of the richness of Catholic philosophical thought. Because so many people, when they object to Catholicism or belief in God, they don't even realize they're objecting on philosophical grounds. The whole argument about evil. I read Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, and I have another YouTube channel which is more philosophical in nature, which is just adults. So I have the one for my family and the one that I do as well. And that's another name. Of course, I picked another really difficult name for it. It's Donec Requiescat, which comes from the phrase, thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. From Augustine, the Donec Requiescat means until it rests. But I made a series of videos replying to the Richard Dawkins book because it's just terrible philosophy.
Okay, now if they prefer radio and videos to reading books, how would they get to these things of yours? Your name is on, of course, this program. When you're listening to this program, you could see it's an interview with Matt D'Antuono. And so you'll see the spelling of the name, and then if you punch that, Google that name up and put YouTube after it, you'll get to see these YouTubes, right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. The full name of the channel is Donec Requiescat with Matt D'Antuono, and so if they put my name in, that'll be one of the things that comes up. I also have
put in that Latin phrase. You just put his name, and these things will come up.
Yeah. I also have a third channel, which is my AP Physics lectures. And if they want to learn AP Physics, they're welcome to watch, but I don't recommend. If they're looking for philosophy, it's not going to be in there. Mechanics and electricity and magnetism on those lectures. But these again, a lot of the same kinds of ideas. The questions I bring up, I put in. I've made some YouTube videos about. And so the book of Fool's Errand is really, it's that informal introduction to philosophy, just a taste, and for true philosophy as well, the love of wisdom. And there they'll find especially the section on ethics, a lot of the things that in The Healing I tried to bring out in a metaphorical kind of way.
Let's see if we can end this program by putting this whole thing into a prayer. So I will enunciate one, and then I'll let Matt do the closing part of the prayer. So, Holy Spirit, you know how many people are out there in our world who just think there are no answers to any of the questions that they wish there were answers to, and who live in a feeling of skepticism and despair because they have no answers to these questions. And so I thank you that you've raised up Matt D'Antuono, and partly because he's a teacher and a father of 8, he knows how to talk to people of all different ages, and that you've inspired him to write these books which could help just these kind of skeptics. So I pray that as a result of this program today, you may become curious enough to check out these books and YouTubes and recommend them to other people. And Matt?
Thank you, Lord, for anything that you have given to us. We know that you are the source of being, the source of goodness, the source of all truth, and anything that we have of those comes from you, as every good gift comes from you, Lord. I ask that you give us wisdom, and most of all that you give us the wisdom that comes from an overflow of love, the love that comes from Jesus Christ and fills our hearts as we love you more, Lord, and then love other people. Amen.
Amen. Well, it was very nice to meet you on this phone, Matt, and I hope
nice to meet you too.
I'd love to meet you in person some way, but I'm in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and you're in where?
New Jersey.
New Jersey, but I was brought up in New York City, so of course I can picture New Jersey. But
yeah, right across the Hudson.
Yeah, it happens, by the way. I mean, this is the part Sebastian will erase afterwards. But it happens I'm a good friend of Peter Kreeft, so I love to hear about people converted by him.
Yeah, well, he played a critical role for me.
Yeah.
You know, he was teaching classes in New York City. They had what was called the King's College, and so we audited a couple of classes that he taught. And
well, we both had the same. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say he was my introduction really to philosophy, and I'm glad because I got Plato and Aristotle from him, and C.S. Lewis and Tolkien as well. It was a class on the philosophy of Lewis and Tolkien, and then another one on Plato and Aristotle. So a good perspective on what philosophy is, the love of wisdom, as opposed to the way that it's taught sometimes, like just kind of imaginative, clever thinking. And in the secular philosophy departments, what I found is that they like to use philosophy as a stick to beat ideas they don't like. Very cynical, kind of jaded, and the strange notion that there is no truth.
Oh, exactly. See, when I was majoring in philosophy as an atheist trying to find truth, what it was like is there was no truth. The mind was a knife to chop up other people's theories. See, there wasn't a light to find truth. Yeah, so I was converted by the von Hildebrands, and one of their disciples was a teacher at Fordham University, and Peter Kreeft studied not with von Hildebrand, but with this disciple who was my godfather, Baldwin Schwartz. And so at one point, my godfather, Baldwin Schwartz, said, you ought to meet Peter Kreeft, who's another student of mine, slightly later than me. And we became fast friends, and I used to, very often teach his ideas and all that, so.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to hear about this. And the torch, you're carrying the torch. Yes, yes.
Doing my best. Well, thank you. I really appreciate your words about my book as well.
I loved it. It was just this wonderful, surprising, marvelous little hiatus in, my frenetic worries about the crisis in the church. Just read this and
Oh, it's good to hear. Do you mind if I use?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm teaching at Holy Apostles this summer for 8 weeks, the summer school course. So I'll be in Connecticut.
Oh.
So if you're ever in Connecticut between May and June, ask Sebastian how to find me. It would be wonderful to meet you.
I'll do that. I have.
Actually, you could. Do you teach in the summer?
I don't. No, thankfully.
Oh, you don't. So you could come to one of my classes and give a guest lecture, for instance.
Love to. What are you teaching? What's your class?
It's philosophy of love.
Oh, wow, that would be amazing. Maybe
right up your line.
Yeah.
Right up your line.
My parents are from Rhode Island, so my mom has a place in Narragansett that she goes every summer. And, it's tough traveling with 8 kids, but last year we didn't. Maybe this year we'll make it up there. And we go right through Connecticut.
Oh, all right. You know where Holy Apostles is, of course. It's Cromwell, Connecticut, between Hartford and New Haven. Yeah. Right. It's a very nice place. Well, anyway. If so, get my info from Sebastian, and remind me who you are, because I'm 82 and I forget everything. Even some of my books I've written, I've forgotten their names. How about that?
I can imagine. Well, no, I believe it, because I had to go back and look at this book. I'm like, I wrote this thing, and I don't even remember. You're asking me for these passages, so I had to go back through and remind myself. I'm like, oh yeah, that part. And I like that part.
It's very nice when you read something and you say, hey, that's good. I have leave you with a nice anecdote. My son was about 12 years old, and he happened to look at one of my books, and he said to me, gee, Mom, if you did all these things that you wrote about in your books, you would be a saint.
Yeah, if only. Oh, boy. Yeah. Great. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, me too. Okay, bless you.
All right. God bless
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Dr. John Aquaviva here, author, professor of exercise science, and host of Faith in Sport on WCAT Radio. Please join us as we discuss current events in the sports world, bring on inspiring guests, and discuss how our Catholic faith impacts all who are involved in sport, the athletes, the coaches, the referees, and yes, even the fans. So join me, Dr. John Aquaviva, as I discuss my two favorite topics, my faith and the world of sport, on the Faith in Sports Show here on WCAT Radio.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.